Hello students, second lecture on CVS is properties of cardiac muscle. Okay, so before to see the properties in details, see the competency on this topic. Competency means at the end of this lecture, you must know, you should know. What you should know? So what are the properties of the cardiac muscle? Describe the properties including morphology, electrical, mechanical and metabolic functions. Okay, so long question can be asked, describe the properties of cardiac muscle in detail. Okay, so that time you make out the list of cardiac properties of cardiac muscle and describe one by one in details. See the list of cardiac muscles, sorry, the list of properties, okay, of cardiac muscle. So here, what are the properties? There are about 7 properties: excitability, autorhythmicity, conductivity, contractility, all or none law, long refractory period, and staircase phenomenon. Okay, here out of these 7 properties, first 3 properties are electrical properties and remaining 4 properties are mechanical properties. Okay, electrical means they are concerned with the electrical activities and mechanical means these 4 properties are concerned with the mechanical activities of the heart, that is contraction and relaxation. Electrical activities means they are concerned with the electrical activities. What are the electrical activities? Like action potential of the heart, depolarization, repolarization. Okay, so these are the electrical properties. So see the orientation of these properties. What is excitability? Excitability means it is the ability of the heart to give the response to the stimulus, and this response is by the development of action potential. So we can say the tissues, almost all tissues in the body are excitable. For example, duster, chalk, these are the things which are not excitable, but tissue of our body, it is excitable. So what is excitability? It gives the response to the stimulus, and that response is in the form of development or the it proves the action potential. Okay, now the next property, autorhythmicity. So what is the meaning of autorhythmicity? It is a ability of the tissue to produce impulse automatically and rhythmically, and it is very special property of the heart. It's a heart muscle only shows this property, that heart produce its own impulses automatically and rhythmically. Okay, we'll go later on there. What is the conductivity? So once the impulse is produced, it is the ability of the tissue to conduct the impulse from one end to the other end, and that is called the conductivity. You know, in wire, impulse is conducted from one end to the other end. That means wire or the metal, it shows the this conductivity. Same in the heart. If the heart is stimulated at the one end, it transmits the impulse or action potential to the other end. So we can say that cardiac muscle conduct the current. Okay, then after that it is followed by the contractility. So what is the meaning of contractility? It is the ability of the tissue to contract when stimulated. Okay, you know, all muscles, smooth muscle, skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle shows this property, that they contracts and cause the movements. Okay, this is a very important property because heart muscle shows this contractility property. Then fifth property, all or none law. So what is the all or none law? So here, if you see this property in the heart either it contracts as a whole or it does not. Okay, so if the heart has to contract, it contract as a whole or it does not. And this is an important property because you know, there is no incomplete contraction in the heart. Heart contract एज ए 100%। ओके, ऐसा कभी नहीं होता हार्ट में कि हार्ट 30% कॉन्ट्रैक्ट हो गया, 50% कॉन्ट्रैक्ट हो गया। वंस इट इज स्टिमुलेटेड, वंस द इम्पल्स इज प्रोड्यूस, it caused the 100% contraction, and that meaning is all or none law. Okay, then long refractory period. So what is a long refractory period? So here it is called the long because if we compare it with the skeletal muscle, the refractory period is more in heart muscle. That's why it is called the long refractory period. And the refractory meaning of refractory period is, it is a period during which muscle does not give the response to the second stimulus. It's very simple. The period during which muscle it does not give the response to the second stimulus or next stimulus, that period is called the refractory period. Okay, and last is the staircase phenomenon. So like this, these are the 7 properties. First you make out the list if you have the long question and describe one by one. Now we'll see first what is a excitability. So here I told that definition is, it is the ability of the tissue to give the response to the stimulus. Okay, and you know stimulus may be in the form of, what are the types of the stimuli? Stimulus may be electrical stimulus, mechanical stimulus, chemical stimulus, thermal stimulus. Okay, and the tissues gives the response to these types of the stimuli. Okay, and response is in the form of action potential, develop the action potential. Okay, and this action potential once developed, depending on the type of the tissue, it is followed by the response. Okay, response to develop the action potential, and it is followed by the physiological action. क्या action is? Suppose excitation, contraction, secretion, depending on the tissue. Okay, here if you see the cardiac muscle, here the physiological action is contraction. Okay, so once the action potential is developed, it is followed by the contraction, that is a physiological action of the action potential. So our cardiac muscles are excitable and produce the action potential in response, and that action potential in heart muscle, it is called the plateau potential. Okay, so plateau potential is there, and you know plateau potential, it is then followed by the contraction of the heart. If you recorded these electrical activities on the ECG, the recording of the electrical activities of the heart is called the electrocardiogram, and it gives the wave. This recording, it gives the waves on ECG paper, the P wave, QRS complex, so Q, R and S waves and T waves. Okay, so these are the waves of ECG. So recording of this electrical activities is called the ECG. So here see it gives the plateau potential in the heart muscle. And what is this plateau potential? Very simple. Here already you studied the action potential, and any action potential, it occurs due what are the phases of the action potential? There is first depolarization, and it is followed by the repolarization. But this action potential is something special in the heart, and that is called the plateau potential. Why it is called the plateau potential? Because here the depolarization is prolonged, depolarization is more, and that's why it is called the plateau potential. So here see the phases and the causes. Phases, first there is a depolarization, and here you know there are this depolarization is due to the rapid opening of the sodium channels and a rapid influx of the sodium ions inside the cell, increases potential from -90 to the +20 millimeter of mercury. Okay, so this is a depolarization. This depolarization is due to the fast sodium channels. Okay, and it is followed by the plateau. The plateau is due to the cardiac muscle remain depolarized for 0.2 second, and it is due to the opening of slow sodium calcium channel. Okay, and here what is the cause of the plateau? It's a opening of slow sodium and calcium channels and the late opening of potassium channel. So here that's why we get the prolonged depolarization, and that is called the plateau. Okay, exactly at this point the potassium channels get open. Okay, and once the potassium channels open, there is a rapid opening of potassium ions, rapid opening of the potassium channels, which cause rapid efflux, that is a diffusion of the potassium ions from inside to the outside, and that leads into the decrease in potential from towards the to the 90 minus 90 millivolts. So during the depolarization potential it comes back to the minus 90, and that is called the depolarization. Okay, so this is what about the first property, that is the excitability. Okay, students, now coming to the next property is the autorhythmicity. What is autorhythmicity? Here the meaning is, or the definition is, it is the ability of the tissue to produce its own impulses automatically and rhythmically, and it is called the self excitation. Okay, so here heart muscle, it shows this property, that is there is a generation of the impulse automatically and rhythmically, and it is particularly the property of special conductive system of the heart. You know, heart is continuously beating organ, and it beats about 70 to 80 beats per minute. Okay, and the pacemaker in the heart is SA node. SA node acts as a pacemaker. Why SA node it acts as a pacemaker? Because its rate of generation of the impulses is high, is about 70 to 80 bits per minute. Okay, so under this property what you should know? So you should know there is a special conductive system in the heart. Okay, and this special conductive system, uh, you know, it has the uh, capacity to produce the impulse. Okay, and also you should know the how the impulse is produced, that is a mechanism of generation of the impulse. Okay, now we'll discuss how the impulse is produced in SA node. Okay, here the mechanism, the SA nodal fibers, see the mechanism how the impulse is produced in SA node. Very simple. If you see the fibers of SA nodal fiber, that is a pacemaker, these fibers are naturally more liquid to sodium ions. So the resting membrane potential is less negative, and the resting membrane potential in SA nodal fiber is minus 55 to minus 60 millivolt. Try to understand in the SA nodal fiber the resting membrane potential is less negative. Second point important, students, if you see there are the three channels in cardiac muscle. So what are these three channels? There are the fast sodium channels, slow calcium sodium channels, and potassium channels. Okay, all three types of the channels are present in cardiac muscle, but there is one difference. One difference is there. If you see in the pacemaker cell, SA nodal cell, all three channels are present, but there is no role of fast sodium channel. Okay, so here only slow calcium sodium channel and potassium channels are taking part in generation of the impulse, but there is no role of fast sodium channel. Okay, so you just try to remember in our previous property we discussed there are the three types of the channels, and it causes the plateau potential in cardiac muscle. Okay, but in pacemaker cell there is a difference, and if you see in the pacemaker cell there is no role of fast sodium channel, there is only role of slow calcium sodium channel and the potassium channels. Okay, so here in SA nodal fibers, how the impulse is generated? See the mechanism. Mechanism is very simple. See in this diagram, here you compare the action potential, that is a pacemaker potential. ये रेड कलर में जो दिखा है that is a pacemaker potential in SA node, and जो ये जो ग्रीन कलर में जो दिखा है that is a plateau potential in ventricular muscle. ये ventricular muscle में है और it is in pacemaker cells. Okay, now see how impulse is produced. Okay, again I will repeat the how mechanism of generation of the impulse. If you start from this point, okay, so I told that the resting membrane potential in SA nodal fiber is minus 55 at resting level when there is no impulse or it is at the rest. Okay, now fiber is naturally more leaky to sodium ions. So in this phase, that is in resting potential, here due to the leakiness of the sodium ions slowly diffuse inside the fibers, and due to the diffusion of positively charged ions from outside to the inside of the fiber, the potential inside the fibers it slowly increases. That is from minus 55, yeah exactly, from minus 55 millivolt to the slowly it goes to the minus 40 millivolt, and exactly 40 millivolt it is a threshold value. Okay, and it is a threshold value where it leads into the opening of slow calcium sodium channels, and once the calcium sodium channels open, there is a diffusion of calcium and sodium ions inside the fibers. That means diffusion of positively charged ions inside the fibers, and it causes to increase the potential inside the fibers from minus 40 millivolt towards the zero potential. Okay, and it is called the depolarization. Okay, exactly at this point, that is to the zero potential, the slow calcium sodium channel get closed and there is opening of potassium channels. Okay, and this phase is called repolarization. Due to the opening of potassium channels here, the potassium ions diffuses, sudden or rapid diffusion of potassium ions from outside to the inside of the fiber. It causes decrease in potential towards the minus side, that is it comes back towards the minus 55 millivolt. Okay, and here the one impulse or one action potential is completed. It starts from this point and it ends here. So one cardiac impulse is produced. Okay, and in this way it repeats again and again about 70 to 80 beats per minute in the SA nodal fiber, and once this impulse is produced, it spread over the heart and it causes the contraction of the heart. So when it spread over the atria and ventricle, then on atria and ventricle the action potential is produced, or the action this response is by the action potential, and that is called the plateau potential. So students, in this way, under this property, that is autorhythmicity. So what is autorhythmicity? And the meaning is it generates the impulse automatically and rhythmically from the SA nodal fiber. So you should know this mechanism. Now up to this point we discussed that impulse is produced. Okay, now we'll continue with how this impulse is conducted to the heart. That is, next property is conductivity. Okay, now see the conductivity. Now impulse is produced in the SA node. What is conductivity? The meaning of the conductivity is it is the ability of the tissue to conduct action potential or the impulse to the other end. And the cardiac muscle, it acts as a conductive. It shows this property. It conduct the impulse from one end to the all end. So all cardiac fibers conduct impulse. You know, in addition to that, in human heart there is a special conductive system for to generate the impulse and to spread the impulse. So what is this special conductive system? We'll go there, and this special conductive system is formed from the modified cardiac muscle. Okay, and these fibers These fibers are special cells can conduct the impulse rapidly from SA node to the ventricles. So what are the parts of the special conductive system? To try to remember, parts are SA node, AV node, bundle of His, right and left bundle branch, and the Purkinje fibers. Okay. Now see the diagram in the next slide. You can understand. So this is a special conductive system of the heart. Okay. Here it is a SA node and AV node. Okay. Parts of special conductive system. It generates the impulse and spread the impulse. SA node, internodal pathway. AV node, bundle of His, left bundle branch, right bundle branch, and the Purkinje fibers. Okay. So in this way, it conducts the current. Okay, now see the sequence of the current flow. You should know how the current it flows. Current कैसे produce होता है और कैसे flow होता है. Here the cardiac impulse is produced here, then it's spread over the atria. At the same time, impulse is conducted from SA node to the AV node. Okay, and here it delays here, then through the bundle of His or the AV bundle branch, this current or this impulse it enters into the ventricle. Okay, and in the ventricle, along with the septum of the ventricle, it is conducted through the left bundle branch and right bundle branch. Then impulse it goes to the Purkinje fibers, because right bundle branch and left bundle branch divides and redivides into the Purkinje fibers, and then Purkinje fiber is connected with the ventricular fibers. So in this way, the current it flows. Okay, so you should know the sequence of the current flow. Try to understand. In this slide, you can easily understand. Impulse is generated in SA node, spread over the atria, then it comes to the AV node, then through the bundle of His, right bundle branch, left bundle branch to the Purkinje fibers, and then its current it's spread over the ventricular muscle. Okay, so up to this point, students, we discuss how the cardiac impulse is conducted, and this is the property of conductivity of the heart. Now the next property is a contractility. Student, in this property, the electrical impulse is followed by the mechanical events. Electrical events followed by the mechanical events, and the heart gives the response to this current or this impulse by contraction. So we can say that it is the ability of the cardiac muscle, or it is the ability of the tissue to contract after stimulation. Okay, and heart muscle contracts due to the cardiac impulse, and which is generated, heart muscle contract due to the cardiac impulse and generate the force for ejection of the blood. So heart contracts and generate the force and pump the blood into the circulation. The mechanism of contraction of the heart is same like the skeletal muscle. Okay, so here we are not going in detail for the mechanism of the contraction, because how the skeletal muscle it contracts, the same way cardiac muscle it contracts. Okay, now see something under the contractility. What is isometric contraction and isotonic contraction? Okay, so these two terminologies are very important under the contractility, that is isometric contraction and isotonic contraction. So here when heart it contracts during systole, initially ventricle shows isometric contraction followed by the isotonic contraction. जब ventricle contract होता है तो पहले वो isometric contraction आता है और then it is followed by the isotonic. So what is the meaning of isometric contraction? Isometric means, iso means same and metros means length. So when cardiac muscle contracts, the length remains same, but tension it increases, force it increases. So are you getting this? So when ventricle starts its contraction, that is when the ventricle starts its systole, Initially, if you see the initial part, it shows the isometric contraction. And why the isometric contraction is there? Because initially the valves are closed. AV valves are closed, atrioventricular valves are closed, and the seminal valves are not yet open. So initially the both valves are closed. Ventricle contracts as a closed cavity. There is no outflow of the blood. There is no inflow of the blood. Just student imagine, very simple. यहाँ से ब्लड बाहर भी नहीं जाता और अंदर भी नहीं जाता, because AV valves are closed and the semilunar valves are not yet open. So heart ventricles are contracting as a closed cavity. Okay, and there is increase in ventricular pressure, intraventricular pressure, but no change in length of the muscle, and that's why it is called the isometric contraction. Okay, so initially there is isometric contraction. Now it is followed by the isotonic contraction. So what is isotonic contraction? So here tone remains same, but there is change in length of the muscle. Okay, so tone means pressure remains same on the muscle, but there is a shortening of the muscle. Contraction, shortening of the muscle, or contraction of the muscle. So what happens in the heart? When the pressure in the ventricle is increased, when there is a increase in sufficient pressure in the ventricle, it leads into the opening of the aortic and pulmonary valves. Once the valves open, जब प्रेशर वेंट्रिकल में बढ़ जाता है एओर्टा एंड पल्मोनरी आर्टरी से ज़्यादा, तो क्या होगा? There is opening of the semilunar valves, and once the semilunar valves, that is aortic valves and pulmonary valves, it open, it pumps the blood into the circulation, and once the blood is pumped, it leads into the shortening of the muscle, and that is called the isometric contraction. Okay, so we studied under contraction property, contractility property, isometric contraction and isotonic contraction. Now we will continue. What is a Frank-Starling's law? So Frank-Starling's law, it is concerned with this property, that is a contractility. So try to understand the length tension relationship, and also try to understand the Frank-Starling's law. The definition of the Frank-Starling's law is very simple. You already studied in skeletal muscle, and you apply this law in the heart muscle. So what is this law? Force of contraction is directly proportional to the initial length of muscle fiber. Okay, so what is this law? Force of contraction is directly proportional to the initial length of fiber. So within physiological limit, what is the meaning? Within physiological limit, if the initial length of muscle is more, then muscle contracts vigorously, or there is a more contraction of the muscle. So imagine, in simple words, I would like to tell you that if you stretch the muscle, observe, आप muscle का थोड़ा length बढ़ाएंगे तो muscle will contract more. That is a Frank-Starling's law. Okay, and apply this law here in the heart. So in stretched muscle, what happens is in stretched muscle, why the stretched muscle contracts more? Because when we stretch the muscle within physiological limit, there is decrease in overlapping of actin and myosin filament. Okay, and if the overlapping is decreased, that means more and more number of myosin heads comes into contact with actin filament. Okay, and it generates the more force, and it leads into the more contraction, increase the contraction. So Frank-Starling's law, it says that if you stretch the muscle, there is a more contraction. Now apply to the heart. In the heart, end diastolic blood volume stretches the ventricular muscle. What is the end diastolic volume? End diastolic volume means at the end of the diastole, how much blood is accumulated in the ventricle. If there is a more accumulation of the blood, that means there is a more stretching of the muscle, and that means there is a increase in contraction, that means increase in force of contraction. And if the force of contraction is increased, that leads into the increase in cardiac output. And simply we can say that heart contract vigorously, heart contraction ज़्यादा होता है. Okay, so again you say, if the increase the end diastolic volume or increase the end diastolic fiber length, there is increase in cardiac output. Okay, so increase in resting length beyond the, so this अभी इधर तक हमारा physiological limit में we studied, but what will happen if you increase the physiological limit, or if you go beyond the physiological limit? If the increase in resting length beyond the physiological limit, there is decrease in contraction, decrease in cardiac output. अगर मसल को बहुत ज़्यादा स्ट्रेच किया, अगर एंड डायस्टोलिक वॉल्यूम बहुत ज़्यादा हो गया, तो व्हाट विल हैपन, द physiological length limit will be crossed, and that leads into the decrease in cardiac output. Okay, so stretching of the muscle should be within physiological limit. So we'll continue. So in this graph or in this curve, you can understand. So what is the relation of end diastolic volume with the force of contraction? Okay, here in this diagram, end diastolic volume is increase. ओके, जैसे जैसे एंड डायस्टोलिक वॉल्यूम इंक्रीज होता है, वैसे वैसे कॉन्ट्रैक्शन, द कॉन्ट्रैक्शन बढ़ जाता है, द लेंथ और द कॉन्ट्रैक्शन ऑफ द मसल इज मोर, बट इट इज अप टू द फिजियोलॉजिकल लिमिट. ओके, उससे ज्यादा अगर स्ट्रेचिंग हो गया मसल का, तो कॉन्ट्रैक्शन, हाउ मच मसल इट कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स, इट डिक्रीजेस. Okay, so if you stretch muscle more than the physiological limit, there is decrease in muscle contraction and there is decrease in cardiac output. Cardiac output भी decrease हो जाता है. Okay, so students, up to this point we discuss the Frank-Starling's law and length tension diagram. This is also called the length tension diagram. Okay, now we'll continue. Laplace's law. Also apply the Laplace's law in this property, that is a contractility. What is the Laplace's law? So when the diameter of the chamber, the diameter of any chamber, it increases, the transmural pressure falls. Okay, that is the Laplace's law. P is equal to 2T by R. Okay, so here you know the transmural pressure is directly proportional to the 2T, so tension on the wall, and inversely proportional to the radius. So we can say that increase the radius or increase the diameter, there is a fall in transmural pressure. That is what Laplace's law it says. Okay, now apply this law to the heart. In heart, increase ventricular chamber diameter. अभी ventricular का diameter अगर बढ़ गया, so यह क्या है, diameter बढ़ गया तो transmural pressure it falls. So increase the ventricular chamber diameter, decreases the transmural pressure and decrease the cardiac output. Okay, so according to the Laplace's law, increase in chamber diameter it leads into the decrease in cardiac output. Okay, now see, preload, that is we just discussed, we just described or just studied in our previous slide. Increase the preload, that is the end diastolic blood volume, causes increase in cardiac output. Okay, so here Frank-Starling's law and Laplace's law, they cause the opposite effect. Okay, two opposite effect. Frank-Starling's law, it says that there is increase in contraction, that means there is increase in cardiac output. Laplace's law says that there is decrease in cardiac output, that means there is decrease in contraction of the ventricle. So why this opposite effect? Now try to understand. This concept is extremely important in clinical practice of cardiology. So meaning is the Frank-Starling's law, it works in normal condition of the heart, but Laplace's law, it works when there is a applied part or some clinical problem in the heart. What problems? When there is a increase, there is a dilatation of the ventricle. For example, there is a myocardiopathy, or we can say that the problem in the heart, or if you see the problems in the heart like hypertension, then diabetes, then also when there is a pressure if remain high. So what happens, just due to the high pressure the ventricles get dilated, and that time we can see the effect of Laplace's law. Here the cardiac, due to the dilatation, due to the increased diameter of the ventricle, the cardiac output it decreases. But normally when there is increase the diameter, that is when there is a increase in end diastolic volume, जितना ज़्यादा blood accumulate होगा और blood accumulate होगा तो diameter बढ़ता है, and that leads into the more contraction of the ventricle and it increases cardiac output. Okay, so up to this point students we discuss what Laplace's law and Frank-Starling's law it says. Okay, now we'll continue. Two more terminology regarding this property, that is a contractility: preload and afterload on the heart. So what is preload on the heart? The preload, the load, what is the meaning of preload on the muscle, any muscle? The load which acts on the muscle before it begins to contract. Okay, so muscle contract होने से पहले वो load act हुआ है, it acts on the muscle before its contraction. Okay, and for example you can apply to the heart the end diastolic volume, means at the end of the diastole how much blood is accumulated in the heart, it acts as a preload. Okay, and what is afterload? The load, the definition or meaning is the load which acts on the muscle after it begins to contract. Okay, so muscle contraction शुरू होने के बाद जो लोड एक्ट होता है, that is called the after load. And here for example when ventricle or the when heart starts contracting, and when after contraction means when the contraction it continues, there is a opening of aortic valve and pulmonary valve. Okay, and the pressure in aorta and pulmonary artery, it acts on the ventricle. When the valves open, that is called the afterload. So blood pressure or the arterial pressure in the systemic circulation, it acts on the heart, and that is called the afterload. So afterload is a resistance against which the ventricle pump the blood, that is called the afterload. So I think students you followed what is the afterload on the heart and what is the preload on the heart. Okay, so up to this point students we discuss regarding the property, the contractility. Okay, so next property is students all or none law, and we'll discuss from this all or none law, we'll discuss it in the second half of the lecture. Okay, so we'll stop here, and in the next class or next half of the next half of this class we'll continue with all or none law. Okay, bye student.